Thank you for being here with us today. Now, let's dive into another story. Harley Horton's fingers moved across his keyboard with practiced precision, reviewing the latest defense contract proposals on his dual monitors. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his home office, highlighting the polished mahogany desk that had been his father's legacy. At 42, he'd built Horton Defense Technologies into a billion-dollar enterprise through sheer determination and ruthless attention to detail. His phone buzzed, interrupting his concentration. Marina's message lit up the screen. "Darling, you're going to be a father." Harley's jaw tightened, his expression hardening as he set the phone face down. The words confirmed what he'd suspected for months, but not in the way Marina intended. He turned to Dr. Darla Doyle, who sat in one of the leather chairs across from his desk, her professional demeanor softening with concern. "The test results are conclusive," Dr. Doyle said, opening the medical file between them. "Given your medical history and the specific nature of your condition, there's no possibility you could be the father. The timing, it's impossible." Harley's fingers drummed once on his desk, the only outward sign of his internal turmoil. "How long have you suspected?" 3 weeks, Darla replied, adjusting her wire-rimmed glasses. "When I noticed Marina's name in Dr. Barnes's patient logs, the timestamps didn't align with any legitimate medical needs." She hesitated, then added, "Harley, I've known you since you and Selma shared that awful dorm room sophomore year. When I saw the pattern emerging, I had an ethical and personal obligation to alert you." "You did the right thing," Harley said, his voice steady despite the betrayal burning in his chest. He pressed a button on his desk phone. "Sarah, cancel my afternoon appointments. And get me Ernestine Barnes's direct line." "Right away, Mr. Horton," his assistant's voice replied crisply. Darla leaned forward, concern etched on her features. "What are you planning?" "Justice," Harley replied simply, turning to study the city skyline through his window. "Nothing more, nothing less." Across town, in Tony Barnes's luxury penthouse, Marina Horton stretched languidly on the Italian leather sofa, admiring how her new diamond tennis bracelet caught the afternoon light. At 35, she still turned heads, her carefully maintained figure and calculated charm opening doors that ambition alone couldn't breach. "You're sure about the timing?" Tony asked, pouring them each a glass of champagne. At 48, he carried his age well, though the silver at his temples betrayed years his expensive suits and cosmetic treatments tried to hide. Marina accepted the crystal flute with a practiced smile. "Of course, darling. I've managed every detail." Harley's been so buried in his precious contracts, he hasn't noticed a thing. Once the baby arrives, he'll be too proud to question it. She sipped the champagne, savoring both its taste and her own cleverness. "And with his fortune and your enthusiasm, we'll have everything we want." Tony settled beside her, his hand possessively claiming her knee. "My wife suspects something. Ernestine's been unusually interested in my appointment logs lately." "Please," Marina scoffed, setting down her glass. "That frigid bitch is too focused on her legal career to notice anything else. Besides, she stayed through your last 2 indiscretions, didn't she? What's one more?" What Marina failed to notice, what her carefully constructed plans never accounted for, was how wrong she was about Ernestine Barnes. The affair had begun innocently enough, or so Marina told herself. 6 months ago, she'd accompanied her friend Charlotte to an appointment at Barnes Medical Group, one of the city's most prestigious private practices. Tony Barnes had noticed her immediately, his appreciation evident in ways that made her feel seen in a way Harley's steady devotion never had. "Mrs. Horton," he'd said, catching her alone in the corridor after Charlotte's appointment, "I couldn't help but notice you seem tense. Perhaps you'd let me examine that neck strain over lunch?" The memory of that first meeting played through Marina's mind as she dressed in Tony's bathroom, adjusting her designer dress with practiced precision. Their weekly appointments had become the highlight of her carefully scheduled life, each encounter charged with the thrill of secrecy and spontaneity. "Your husband called the office again," Tony mentioned, watching her from the doorway. "Something about updating his medical records." Marina rolled her eyes, applying a fresh coat of lipstick. "He's always been obsessive about documentation. It's what makes him so brilliant at business and so boring at home." She turned, offering Tony a calculated pout. Unlike some doctors I know, what Marina didn't see was the flash of contempt that crossed Tony's face when she turned back to the mirror. He'd played this game before, knew every step of the dance. Bored wealthy wives were his specialty, each affair following the same comfortable pattern until it reached its natural conclusion. The gifts, the promises, the calculated passion, all part of a script he'd perfected over years. But this time, the audience included one person he'd underestimated, his wife. Ernestine Barnes sat in her corner office at Barnes & Associates, reviewing the documentation her private investigator had compiled. Security footage showed Marina entering the medical practice without appointments. Credit card statements tracked Tony's gifts, the bracelet, designer handbags, intimate dinners at exclusive restaurants. Each piece of evidence carefully cataloged, building a pattern she'd seen twice before. "Mrs. Barnes?" Her assistant's voice interrupted her concentration. "Dr. Doyle is here to see you." Ernestine straightened, her tailored suit as impeccable as her reputation. "Send her in." Darla Doyle entered, clutching a medical file with nervous energy. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice. You mentioned a concerned Marina Horton," Ernestine said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "I assume this relates to her recent pregnancy claims?" "How did you?" Darla stopped, noting the organized files on Ernestine's desk. "You already knew." "I know everything, Dr. Doyle. It's why I'm very good at what I do." Ernestine leaned forward, her expression focused. "Tell me about Harley Horton's medical condition." As Darla explained the scientific impossibility of Harley fathering a child without specific medical interventions, Ernestine's resolve hardened. She'd protected Tony through 2 previous scandals, preserving their social position and his medical license. This time would be different. Selma Bell's return to town wasn't meant to be permanent. After her divorce from Marcus, she planned a short stay with family to regroup before starting fresh somewhere new. But life had other plans, beginning with a chance encounter at her brother-in-law's office. "Selma?" Harley looked up from his desk, surprise softening his usually stern features. "I thought you were in Seattle." The tech scene lost its charm, she replied, managing a small smile. "Or maybe I just needed family more than stock options." That first conversation lasted hours, moving from his office to a quiet dinner at his favorite steakhouse. They discussed everything except their shared connection to Marina, his work in defense technology, her architectural designs, their mutual love of historical preservation. "You should see the Morrison building downtown," Harley mentioned over dessert. "They're planning to demolish it next month." Crying shame, considering the Art Deco details. "The one with the bronze elevator doors?" Selma's eyes lit up. "I wrote my thesis on that architectural period. I could show you if you're interested." Before they tear it down, that weekend visit to the Morrison building became a regular tradition. Each Saturday, they explored another historical site, their conversations flowing naturally from design theory to personal philosophy. Selma found herself drawn to Harley's quiet strength, his ethical clarity, a stark contrast to Marcus's volatile nature. One rainy afternoon, sheltering in the doorway of an abandoned theater, Selma caught herself studying Harley's profile. "Why did my sister marry you?" The question surprised them both. Harley considered it carefully, rain drumming against the aged marquee above them. She saw what she wanted to see, he answered finally. A successful man who could give her the life she thought she deserved. "I saw someone I thought I could build a future with." His laugh held no bitterness, only resignation. "We were both wrong." "And now?" Selma asked softly. "Now I see clearly." His eyes met hers, holding something that neither of them was ready to name. Sometimes clarity comes too late. Sometimes it comes right on time. They maintained careful boundaries, both too ethical to act on the growing connection between them. But as evidence of Marina's betrayal mounted, their friendship deepened into something neither had planned. "You should document everything," Selma advised during one of their architectural expeditions, her professional eye noting details of a century-old facade. "Marina's never been good at covering her tracks." "Already done," Harley replied, watching her sketch the building's features in her notebook. "Your sister mistakes my focus for ignorance. It's a common error among people who underestimate their opponents." Selma looked up from her drawing, studying his expression. "You're not as cold as you pretend to be, Harley Horton." "No," he agreed, allowing himself a rare smile. "But I am exactly as ruthless as I need to be." That evening, alone in his study, Harley reviewed the latest report from his security team. Marina's affair with Tony Barnes was documented in meticulous detail, every meeting and gift cataloged with professional precision. The evidence mounted daily, building toward a conclusion he'd already accepted. His phone buzzed again, another message from Marina. "Did you get my news? Aren't you excited?" Harley set the phone aside without responding, turning instead to the DNA test results Dr. Doyle had provided. The truth was there in black and white, clinical and undeniable. His marriage was built on lies, but his response would be founded on absolute truth. The sun set over the city skyline, casting long shadows across his office. In the gathering darkness, Harley Horton began to plan, not for revenge, but for justice. The distinction, he knew, would make all the difference. Harley read Marina's text message one final time before setting his phone down with deliberate care. The late afternoon sun glinted off the DNA test results spread across his desk, each page a testament to Dr. Doyle's gentle explanation from the previous week. His condition, discovered during a routine physical years ago, made conception impossible without specific medical interventions. Interventions he and Marina had never pursued. "Your wife's been thorough in establishing her deception," Ernestine Barnes observed, adjusting her designer's suit as she reviewed the documentation. She'd arrived within 30 minutes of his call, her Hermes briefcase containing evidence that painted a damning picture. The insurance claims through Tony's practice show a calculated pattern. She's been laying groundwork for months. Harley's expression remained neutral, but his eyes held steel. "Walk me through the timeline." Ernestine spread several documents across his desk with practiced precision. Marina began regular visits to Tony's practice 6 months ago. No legitimate medical needs, but all carefully coded for insurance purposes. They met for consultations every Tuesday and Thursday. Her manicured finger traced a series of dates. Meanwhile, Tony's been financing their affair through a series of increasingly expensive gifts, which you've documented. Every purchase. Ernestine's smile held no warmth. The diamond bracelet last month was particularly egregious. He used our joint credit card. Harley stood, moving to the window. The city sprawled below, unaware of the careful dismantling of 2 marriages happening in his office. "How long have you known?" "About Tony's affairs?" "Years." "About Marina specifically?" "For months." Ernestine gathered the documents with practiced efficiency. "I stayed quiet through his previous indiscretions. Protected our social position, his medical license. This time," she paused, her composure cracking slightly. "This time is different. Because of the pregnancy claim? Because I'm tired of protecting a man who doesn't deserve it." Ernestine's voice held decades of accumulated anger. "Your wife's deception gives us both what we need, a clean break with irrefutable evidence." Harley turned from the window, his decision made weeks ago, but now solidified. "Show me what you need me to sign." The next hours passed in a blur of legal documents and strategic planning. Harley had spent weeks quietly preparing, guided by Ernestine's expertise. The house had been systematically emptied of his most important possessions, assets secured, and evidence carefully compiled. Even his company's sensitive defense contracts had been moved to a new secure facility beyond Marina's reach. "The prenuptial agreement works in our favor," Ernestine noted, reviewing another document. "Marina's infidelity triggers the infidelity clause. She'll receive nothing beyond what she brought into the marriage." "She brought nothing," Harley stated flatly. "Then she'll leave with nothing." Ernestine's smile was sharp. "Poetic justice, wouldn't you say?" Sarah, Harley's assistant, interrupted with a gentle knock. "Mr. Horton, your sister-in-law is here." Harley checked his watch, noting the time with precision. "Send her in." Selma entered the office just as Ernestine finished organizing the last of the documentation. Something in her bearing caught Harley's attention immediately, a nervous energy that seemed at odds with her usual composed demeanor. She clutched a small envelope that trembled slightly in her hands. I wasn't planning to say anything today, Selma began, her voice soft but steady. But given the circumstances, she drew a deep breath. Harley, I'm pregnant. The words hung in the air, their implications slowly dawning. Unlike Marina's calculated deception, this truth had arrived unexpected and unplanned. Their one night together, after months of fighting their growing feelings, had resulted in something neither had anticipated. Dr. Doyle, who had remained quietly observant until now, stepped forward. Let me see the test results. Selma handed over the envelope with shaking fingers. Darla reviewed the contents, her medical training allowing her to quickly process the implications. The timing, she looked up, meeting Harley's gaze. Your condition makes conception difficult, but not impossible under very specific circumstances. These results align perfectly with what we know about your medical history. Unlike Marina's claims, Ernestine added, her legal mind already calculating the implications. Harley moved to Selma's side, his usual restraint giving way to protective instinct. Are you certain? 6 weeks, Selma confirmed, finally meeting his eyes. I confirmed it with 3 different tests before coming here. I know the timing is terrible, with everything happening with Marina, but the timing is perfect, Harley interrupted, his voice firm. For the first time that day, a genuine smile crossed his features. This child, unlike the one Marina claims, is undeniably mine. Ernestine watched the scene unfold with professional interest. This actually strengthens our position. Marina's deception becomes even more egregious when contrasted with a legitimate pregnancy. My pregnancy isn't a legal strategy, Selma said sharply, her hand moving protectively to her stomach. No, Harley agreed, his tone softening as he looked at her. It's a miracle. Dr. Doyle cleared her throat. We'll need to begin prenatal care immediately. Given your age and Harley's condition, this pregnancy will require careful monitoring. I won't let anything happen to either of you, Harley stated, the promise carrying the weight of absolute certainty. Selma touched his arm gently. I know you won't. But Harley, she glanced at the legal documents spread across his desk. What about Marina? Marina made her choices, he replied, his expression hardening again. Now she'll face the consequences. Marina stood in Tony's penthouse, reading Harley's devastating reply to her pregnancy announcement. The phone slipped from her suddenly numbed fingers, clattering against the imported marble floor. Each phrase hit like a physical blow. DNA test. Not the father. Your lover's wife is my lawyer. This can't be happening, she whispered, color draining from her face. Tony emerged from his home office, irritation clear in his expression. What's wrong now? Harley knows. Marina's voice shook. About everything. And your wife. Ernestine is representing him. Impossible. Tony grabbed the phone, scanning the message. His practiced confidence crumbled as he read. That vindictive bitch. After everything I've given her? Marina's hysteria gave way to anger. What about what you promised me? A new life, a fresh start. Don't be naive, Tony snapped, his charm evaporating like morning dew. You're not the first, and you won't be the last. This was fun while it lasted, but I'm not risking my practice over your failed manipulation. Marina stared at him, finally seeing the man beneath the polished exterior. You knew about Harley's condition. You knew I was lying about the pregnancy. Of course I knew. Tony's laugh held no warmth. I'm his doctor, remember? But watching you spin your little web was entertaining. Until now. Marina grabbed her purse, backing away from him. You're a bastard, and you're a fool. Tony turned away dismissively. Don't bother coming back. I'll have security remove you if you try. Marina fled, her designer heels clicking frantically across the parking garage. The drive home passed in a blur of panic and denial. But the house felt different the moment she opened the door. Emptier, hollower, as if the very walls knew her deception had failed. In their bedroom, centered perfectly on the bed, lay the divorce papers. Beside them, a single photograph. Harley and Selma at a recent charity gala, his hand protectively near her waist, both radiant with genuine happiness. The note beneath the photo, in Selma's familiar handwriting, delivered the final blow. Guess who's really carrying your husband's child? Family dinner will be awkward now, sis. Marina sank to her knees, the magnitude of her miscalculation crushing her. She'd gambled everything on a lie, never imagining truth would be her undoing. Her phone buzzed. Another message from Harley, this one brief and final. My lawyers will contact you in the morning. Don't bother trying to negotiate. The prenup is ironclad, and your infidelity is well documented. You played a foolish game, Marina. Now you've lost everything. In his office across town, Harley set down his phone with finality. Selma watched him from the couch where she'd been resting, concern evident in her expression. Are you all right? Harley moved to join her, his decision to end his marriage bringing not pain but relief. For the first time in months, I'm perfectly fine. He took her hand, gentle despite his ruthless handling of Marina. We have a future to plan. Ernestine gathered her files, preparing to leave. The divorce proceedings will begin tomorrow. Marina won't know what hit her. Good, Harley replied, his attention already shifted to Selma and their unborn child. Marina's deception had failed, but from its ashes, something honest and true had emerged. As the sun set over the city, casting long shadows through his office windows, Harley Horton began planning not for revenge, but for the future he never expected to find. The divorce proceedings unfolded with the precision of a well-orchestrated symphony, each revelation striking another devastating blow to Marina's carefully constructed facade. Ernestine Barnes stood before Judge Catherine Shun, her designer suit as impeccable as her preparation. Your Honor, I draw your attention to Exhibit C, Ernestine stated, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed courtroom. These documents demonstrate a pattern of deliberate deception. Mrs. Horton not only engaged in an affair with my client's physician, but attempted to use that relationship to fabricate a pregnancy claim. Marina sat at the defendant's table, her once confident posture now brittle. Her attorney, a third-rate lawyer who'd taken her case after the city's top firms declined, shuffled papers nervously. Furthermore, Ernestine continued, evidence shows Mrs. Horton attempted to access classified information from Horton Defense Technologies using Mr. Horton's personal credentials. The Department of Defense has opened a separate investigation into this breach attempt. Judge Chin reviewed the documents, her expression growing increasingly severe. These are serious allegations, Mrs. Barnes. What else have you uncovered? Financial records indicate Mrs. Horton embezzled approximately $847,000 from joint accounts over the past year, funneling the money through a series of shell companies connected to Dr. Barnes's practice. Ernestine presented another stack of documents. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit has expressed significant interest in these transactions. Marina's face drained of color. Across the courtroom, Harley watched impassively, his presence a reminder of everything she'd lost through her own choices. The evidence mounted week after week. Each court session brought new humiliations as Ernestine methodically revealed the full extent of Marina's betrayal. False medical records, embezzled funds, attempted corporate espionage. The list seemed endless. Meanwhile, Tony Barnes faced his own reckoning. The state medical board convened an emergency session after receiving Ernestine's comprehensive documentation of his ethical violations. Dr. Barnes, board chairman Dr. Maxwell Reed addressed Tony across the hearing room. These records indicate a pattern of inappropriate relationships with patients spanning nearly 2 decades. How do you respond? Tony's usual charm had abandoned him, leaving behind a man who looked significantly older than his years. These allegations are greatly exaggerated. My wife is clearly acting out of spite. Your wife, Dr. Reed interrupted, has provided evidence of 3 previously buried settlements with former patients. Each case involved similar patterns of manipulation and medical ethical violations. The board finds it particularly troubling that you used your position as a physician to facilitate these relationships. The investigation expanded rapidly. Former patients came forward, encouraged by the publicity surrounding Marina's case. Tony's prestigious practice, built over 20 years of careful image management, crumbled in 20 days of revelations. I trusted you, one former patient testified, tears streaming down her face. You said the treatments were necessary, that the extra appointments were medical requirements. Also you could, she broke off, unable to continue. Tony sat alone during these proceedings. His partners had quickly dissolved their association, desperate to distance themselves from the scandal. The practice's reputation, once sterling, lay in tatters. The final blow came during a tense family gathering at Beatriz Martinez's home. The matriarch had called both daughters together, determined to address the situation head-on. "Mama, please," Marina began, reaching for her mother's hand. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." Beatriz cut her off, her accent thickening with emotion. "I raised you both to value truth, to respect family. Why K-Heisist? What did you do with those lessons?" Selma stood quietly by the window, her hand resting protectively over her growing belly. Marina shot her a venomous look. "Of course you take her side," Marina spat. "Everyone takes precious Selma's side. Your sister's happiness isn't your tragedy," Beatrice stated firmly. "Your choices are. The lies, the manipulation, the betrayal of your own family. These were your decisions, Marina. No one else's. He was never good enough for me anyway," Marina declared, desperation making her cruel. "Always working, always so focused on his precious company. Good enough?" Beatrice's voice cracked like a whip. "Harley built something real, something lasting. While you, Mihija, built castles of lies that are now crumbling around you." The family dynamic shifted permanently that day, as relatives gradually understood that Harley and Selma's relationship had grown from mutual respect and healing rather than revenge. Support for Marina dwindled. Even her closest cousins, who'd initially sympathized with her, stepped back as the truth emerged. Spring arrived with unexpected grace, painting the city in fresh colors that seemed to mirror the changes in their lives. Harley and Selma's wedding, held in Beatrice's meticulously maintained garden, gathered only their closest supporters, the people who'd stood by them through the storm. Dr. Darla Doyle, now their personal physician monitoring Selma's pregnancy, raised her glass during the intimate reception. "To love that grows in truth's light," she toasted, her words carrying special weight given her role in exposing Marina's deception. Ernestine Barnes, no longer Tony's wife, had found unexpected friendship with Selma during the months of legal proceedings. Their shared experience of betrayal created a bond that transcended their unusual connection. "I never expected to find family in all this," Ernestine admitted, watching Harley and Selma's first dance. "But sometimes the best relationships grow from the ashes of the worst ones." Marina didn't attend, though Beatrice had insisted on sending an invitation. Instead, she watched from her small rented apartment as social media filled with images of the celebration. Her new life as a junior account manager at a struggling firm was a far cry from her former lifestyle. Tony had fled the state, facing medical license suspension and multiple lawsuits. His departure left both Marina and Ernestine to rebuild their lives from the wreckage of his choices, though their paths diverged dramatically. "I found this property yesterday," Ernestine told the newlyweds over lunch a week after the wedding. She spread photographs of a historic mansion across the table. "It needs work, but given your love of architectural restoration," Selma's eyes lit up as she studied the images. "The original woodwork is intact. Harley, look at these Art Deco details. The price is well below market," Ernestine added, slipping into lawyer mode. "The owner's eager to sell. I could handle the negotiations if you're interested." Harley watched his wife's enthusiasm with undisguised affection. "Draw up the papers." The purchase marked a new chapter. The mansion, sitting on 3 acres at the city's edge, became their joint project. Selma's architectural expertise guided the restoration, while Harley's business acumen managed the logistics. Late autumn painted the restored mansion's gardens in rich colors when Elizabeth Grace Horton made her appearance. The delivery room filled with joy as Harley held his daughter, marveling at the perfection of her tiny features. "She has your eyes," he told Selma, who watched them with exhausted radiance. "And your determination," Selma replied, noting their daughter's strong grip. "She couldn't wait to meet us." Dr. Doyle performed the final checks with professional thoroughness tinged with personal joy. Everything's perfect, she assured them. Both mother and daughter are doing exactly as they should. A small package arrived the next day, a silver rattle and a note of congratulation from Marina. The gesture, tentative but sincere, was acknowledged with quiet grace by Selma. She's still family, Selma explained when Harley raised an eyebrow at the gift. Not close family anymore, but family nonetheless. Tony attempted reconciliation with Ernestine around this time, sending lengthy emails filled with promises of change. She deleted them unread, too focused on building her new law firm specializing in medical ethics cases. Life has a way of turning pain into purpose, Ernestine reflected during one of her regular dinner visits to the Horton home. Her sharp wit and resilient spirit had made her more family than former adversary. Every case we win helps prevent another doctor from abusing their position. Elizabeth grew into a curious, joyful child, her parents' determination tempered by her mother's grace. The historic mansion filled with laughter, its restored grandeur providing a fitting backdrop for their happiness. The chance encounter at Elizabeth's favorite ice cream parlor wasn't planned, but perhaps it was inevitable in a city that suddenly seemed smaller than before. Marina, humbled by 5 years of consequences, had built a modest but honest life. Seeing Selma, now obviously expecting her second child, stopped her in her tracks. "I'm sorry," Marina said simply, watching Elizabeth's carefree play. "Not just for what I did, but for not seeing what was right in front of me all along." Selma studied her sister, noting the changes time had wrought. Gone were the designer clothes and calculated charm, replaced by something more genuine, if less polished. Their conversation was interrupted by Harley's arrival, their son Thomas toddling beside him. His greeting to Marina carried civil courtesy, nothing more, as his arm found its natural place around Selma's waist. That evening, after Elizabeth and Thomas were tucked into bed in their beautifully restored home, Harley and Selma sat in their garden. The setting sun painted the sky in colors that seemed to celebrate their journey. "Do you ever regret how we found our way here?" Selma asked, her hand resting on the curve of her growing belly. Harley considered the question, thinking of the pain and betrayal that had preceded their joy. "Truth has a way of leading us home," he answered finally, "even when the path isn't what we expected." Their phones buzzed simultaneously, a message from Ernestine announcing another landmark victory. Her latest case had established stricter protocols for medical ethics review boards, ensuring that Tony's actions, though devastating personally, led to systemic changes protecting future patients. Marina, in her own apartment across town, looked at old family photos and made peace with her choices. The lesson had been harsh but clear. Redemption didn't mean reclaiming what was lost, but building something new from the lessons of the past. The story found its completion where it began, with a message about impending fatherhood. But this time, when Harley read the ultrasound results Selma sent, his joy was untainted by doubt. Their foundation, built on honesty and strengthened through adversity, supported not just their love, but the future of their growing family. Sometimes, Selma told Elizabeth during bedtime stories, the hardest truths lead us to our greatest happiness. The child didn't yet understand the depth of those words, but she would learn their wisdom in time, surrounded by the lasting love her parents had built together. Epilogue: a decade of consequences. 10 years after the scandal that rocked the city's medical community, Tony Barnes sat alone in a dingy bar on the outskirts of Phoenix, Arizona. The once prestigious doctor now worked locum tenens at walk-in clinics, his medical license restrictions preventing him from establishing his own practice. His carefully maintained appearance had given way to premature aging, his silver hair now completely white, his designer suits replaced by off-the-rack clothing that barely masked his declined status. "Another scotch," he called to the bartender, his hands shaking slightly as he reached for his wallet. The leather was worn, containing only a fraction of the wealth he'd once commanded. The medical board's investigation had triggered a cascade of lawsuits, each settlement draining his resources until nothing remained of his former fortune. His phone buzzed, another rejection from a medical staffing agency. His reputation followed him across state lines, the internet ensuring his past misdeeds remained just a Google search away. Ernestine's legal victory hadn't just changed medical ethics protocols. It had created a searchable database of physician misconduct that made his name a permanent cautionary tale. Dr. Barnes? A voice from behind made him flinch. He turned to find a middle-aged woman studying him with undisguised contempt. I thought it was you. I was one of your patients in 2015. Tony grabbed his coat, leaving cash for his unfinished drink. These confrontations had become more frequent lately, former patients recognizing him despite his attempts to maintain anonymity. He hurried to his apartment, a far cry from his luxury penthouse with its peeling paint and unreliable air conditioning. A letter from his lawyer waited in his mailbox. Another former patient had come forward, seeking damages for unnecessary procedures he'd prescribed during their affair. His malpractice insurance, what little remained after the initial scandals, wouldn't cover this one. At 63, Tony Barnes faced the reality that he would likely die in poverty, his reputation irredeemably destroyed. Across the country, Marina Horton, now Marina Martinez again, organized files in her cramped office at a mid-tier insurance company in Minneapolis. The junior account manager position she'd started with had led to middle management, though her salary barely covered her modest lifestyle. The attempted corporate espionage at Horton Defense Technologies had left her virtually unemployable in her former industry, forcing her to rebuild from scratch. Ms. Martinez? Her assistant knocked tentatively. Your sister's wedding invitation arrived. Marina accepted the elegant envelope with trembling hands. Elizabeth, now 10, had served as flower girl at several family weddings, but this would be different. Her daughter, Rachel, conceived during a brief marriage that ended when her second husband discovered her past, would be participating alongside her cousin. The invitation included a personal note from Selma. Family is still family. Your niece would love to meet her cousin. Tears blurred Marina's vision as she remembered her own daughter's birth 5 years ago. The delivery room had been empty except for the medical staff. No family, no friends. The loneliness of that moment had finally broken through her remaining defenses, forcing her to confront the true cost of her choices. Her phone's screensaver showed Rachel's school picture. At 5, she had Marina's dark hair, but none of her calculated charm. Marina had made sure of that, raising her daughter with painful honesty about her own past mistakes. Mommy made bad choices, she'd explain when Rachel asked why they lived so far from their family. But that doesn't mean you have to pay for them forever. The company gossip still followed her, whispered conversations stopping when she entered the break room. Her background check had revealed everything during her initial interview, but the HR director, a woman who believed in second chances, had given her an opportunity with clear conditions. 10 years of exemplary service had earned her respect, if not acceptance. Ernestine Barnes sat in her corner office at Barnes and Mitchell Ethics Advocates, the law firm she'd built from the ashes of her marriage. The view of downtown showcased her success. 3 floors of prime office space, housing 30 attorneys specialized in medical ethics and patient advocacy. The Anderson case settled. Her partner, Sarah Mitchell, announced from the doorway. The hospital's implementing all our recommended protocols. Good. Ernestine smiled, adding another victory to her impressive record. How's the legislative package progressing? The Patient Protection Act passed committee. They're calling it the Barnes Act, you know? Your case against Tony changed everything. The legislation, inspired by Tony's systematic abuse of patient trust, would create nationwide standards for medical ethics enforcement. Ernestine's documentation of his misconduct had exposed gaps in oversight that allowed predatory physicians to move between states, escaping consequences. Her personal life had flourished alongside her professional success. After years of focusing on her career, she'd found unexpected happiness with Judge Catherine Chun, who'd presided over Marina's divorce. Their wedding the previous year had been intimate but joyous, with Selma serving as her maid of honor. The Hortons invited us to dinner next week, Sarah mentioned. Elizabeth's science project won first place again? Of course it did. Ernestine smiled proudly. Her goddaughter had inherited both Harley's analytical mind and Selma's creative vision. I'll bring the files for the new medical board initiative. Harley's insights on corporate compliance have been invaluable. Dr. Darla Doyle's medical practice had evolved into one of the city's most respected women's health centers. Her role in exposing Tony's misconduct had initially threatened her career, but her ethical stance ultimately attracted patients who valued integrity over expedience. Dr. Doyle? Her nurse interrupted her charting. Mrs. Horton's here for Thomas's sports physical. Darla smiled, remembering the day she'd confirmed Selma's first pregnancy. She'd been present for all three Horton children's births, her friendship with the family deepening over the years. "How's the team doing, Thomas?" she asked the lanky 8-year-old who bounded into her office. At 13, Elizabeth had already skipped 2 grades, while 5-year-old Grace showed signs of inheriting her mother's artistic talent. "We're undefeated." Thomas beamed, his father's competitive spirit shining through. "Dad's been helping me practice." Selma watched from the doorway, her success as an architectural preservationist evident in her confident bearing. The historic mansion she and Harley had restored now anchored a foundation dedicated to architectural conservation, combining their professional skills with their passion for preservation. Horton Defense Technologies had tripled in size under Harley's leadership, its ethical business practices setting industry standards. The attempted corporate espionage by Marina had led to enhanced security protocols now adopted across the defense sector. Harley stood at his office window, the same one where he contemplated Marina's betrayal a decade ago. The view had changed. New buildings rose across the skyline, many featuring his wife's architectural influence. "The Johnson contract is ready for review," Sarah, still his trusted assistant, announced. And Elizabeth's school called. She won the national mathematics competition. Pride warmed his expression. His oldest daughter had recently tested at genius level, her intellectual gifts matched by a strong ethical foundation. Thomas showed promise in both athletics and engineering, while young Grace already filled sketchbooks with detailed architectural drawings. "Have flowers sent to the school," he instructed. "And make sure the foundation board meets next week." Selma's preservation proposal needs full support. Their marriage had deepened with time, their shared values and complementary strengths creating a partnership that influenced both their professional and personal lives. The historic mansion they'd restored had become a gathering place for family and friends, its gardens hosting celebrations and quiet moments alike. The extended family gathered for Sunday dinner at the Horton Mansion, a tradition that had evolved over the years. Ernestine and Judge Chun brought legal insights and dry wit to the conversations. Dr. Doyle shared medical advances and family stories. Even Beatrice, now in her 70s, contributed wisdom seasoned with her characteristic directness. Marina's presence at these gatherings remained rare but significant. Each visit required courage, facing the consequences of her actions reflected in the lives she'd tried to destroy. Rachel, accepted without reservation by her cousins, found the family connection she'd missed in Minneapolis. "The children are thriving," Selma observed, watching the 4 kids play in the garden. "They have no idea how complicated their family story is. They'll learn when they're ready," Harley replied, his arm around his wife's waist. "Truth has always been our foundation." The garden party celebrated more than family. It marked a decade of choices and consequences, of lives rebuilt and lessons learned. Tony Barnes's destruction served as a cautionary tale in medical ethics courses. Marina's journey from betrayal to modest redemption taught humility and accountability. Elizabeth Grace Horton, 13 going on 30, gathered her younger siblings and cousin for stories in the mansion's library. Her academic achievements had already drawn university interest, but her emotional intelligence, perhaps her greatest inheritance from her mother, helped her navigate family complexity with grace. "Tell us about the mansion renovation again," Thomas requested, his engineer's mind fascinated by the restoration details. "Better yet," Rachel interjected quietly, "tell us how our parents met." Elizabeth exchanged glances with her mother, who nodded permission from the doorway. The children deserved to understand their heritage, both its shadows and its light. "It's a story about truth," Elizabeth began, echoing her mother's bedtime tales, about how the hardest truths sometimes lead us to our greatest happiness. The story would unfold differently this time, shaped by a decade of perspective. Marina's choices served as warnings. Tony's downfall demonstrated justice. But the heart of the narrative remained unchanged. Truth, however difficult, provided the only reliable foundation for lasting happiness. The epilogue to Marina's deception played out across lives and institutions. Tony Barnes, once prestigious and powerful, served as a warning to medical students about the consequences of ethical violations. His case appeared in textbooks, his downfall teaching future doctors that privilege demanded responsibility. Marina's journey from wealthy socialite to single mother in Minnesota illustrated how choices rippled through generations. Rachel would grow up understanding accountability, her mother's hard-earned wisdom shaping her character in ways Marina's privileged upbringing never had. Ernestine's law firm continued expanding, its influence reaching beyond individual cases to shape policy. The Barnes Act, her legislative legacy, protected patients nationwide. Her marriage to Judge Chun added personal joy to professional fulfillment, proving that endings sometimes conceal beginnings. The Horton family flourished, their success built on the same principles that had exposed Marina's deception. Harley's business acumen combined with Selma's creative vision, their children inheriting both their talents and their values. The historic mansion stood as a physical testament to rehabilitation and renewal, its restored beauty reflecting the family's journey. Dr. Doyle's practice became a model for ethical medical care, her steadfast integrity attracting patients who valued truth over convenience. Her friendship with the Hortons deepened into family ties, professional relationships strengthened by shared principles. 10 years after Marina's deception unraveled, the consequences of truth and lies remained clear. Tony Barnes, aging into obscurity in Arizona, represented the price of betrayal. Marina, building a modest life in Minneapolis, demonstrated that redemption required acceptance of limitations. But the story's heart lay in the Horton Mansion's garden, where family gathered to celebrate connections stronger than blood. Elizabeth, Thomas, Grace, and Rachel played among renovated fountains, their laughter healing old wounds. Selma and Harley watched from the terrace, their love deepened by shared values and tested by time. "Do you ever wonder," Selma asked her husband, "what would have happened if Marina hadn't betrayed you?" Harley considered the question, watching their children play. "Some truths have to break us before they can heal us," he answered finally. "Marina's deception showed me what real loyalty looks like." The sun set over their restored home, painting the sky in colors that celebrated survival and renewal. Inside, Elizabeth began another story for her siblings and cousin, her voice carrying the wisdom of a family that had learned the hardest lessons about truth and consequences. The end of their story had become a beginning for others. Tony's downfall reformed medical ethics. Marina's journey taught humility. But the Hortons' triumph proved that truth, however painful, offered the surest foundation for lasting happiness. In the garden of their restored mansion, surrounded by family both blood and chosen, they had built something Marina's deceptions could never achieve, a legacy of honesty that would guide generations to come. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.